collective song has always been an incredibly powerful experience in my life, and one that I think for a lot of different reasons, some of them economic and some of them cultural, have dwindled down so much over the last few centuries that we no longer really do it except in some religious contexts. And song has become performative. And I think that's only having song be performative rather than experiential is a deep, deep loss.
Hi there, and welcome to This Is Why We Sing, a podcast with me, James Sills, that explores the transformative power and the transformative potential of singing. I'm a musician, a singing leader and an author, and I'm convinced that singing can help us to lead happier, healthier and more fulfilling lives. In this podcast, I invite guests coming from a number of different perspectives to talk with me about singing, to share their insights, their stories and their inspiration. Today's guest is Priya Parker, and I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. For me, it feels like the perfect way to round off the first series of the podcast. Priya, in my mind, is the go-to person when thinking about gathering and what it means to connect meaningfully as humans. Through her writing, her group facilitation, and her work as a conflict mediator, she helps people around the world, both individuals and communities, create collective meaning in the 21st century. She's very much in demand as a speaker and a broadcaster, recently appearing on Brené Brown's podcast, speaking at the South by Southwest Festival in America. And so I was so honoured when she said yes to sitting down with me over Zoom to talk about singing and gathering and how we might be able to do both of those things in a more meaningful way. I've been a big fan of Priya's work ever since reading her 2018 book, The Art of Gathering, so we discuss this and much more in today's conversation with myself in North Wales and Priya in Brooklyn. Enjoy. Priya Parker, welcome to the podcast. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to connect. Goodness, there's so much I want to talk to you about, but there's the first question that I ask everybody who appears on the podcast, which is, what song's in your head right now?
Ooh, I have been listening to Brown Skin Girl a lot by Beyonce, and I think Blue Ivy, her daughter. That is a song that's been playing in my head a lot recently.
Yeah, what does that song do for you?
It fills me with possibility.
I'd be interested to know about your kind of relationship with singing, like the singing. What role does singing have in your life, in your personal life?
It's interesting. I grew up. I'm half Indian, half white American, and I grew up in a split household, but meaning my parents were divorced and they each remarried. And every 2 weeks I would go back and forth between these two households. And so when I was at my father's house, they are Presbyterian, and I grew up in the church when I was in that part of my of the 2 weeks of the month. And to be in church, at least in the churches that I went to, meant to often be in collective song. And for me, growing up, particularly in the church, it gave a space where it was allowed to sing. It was allowed to, I remember hearing scripture saying, the Lord says it doesn't, don't sound amazing, or sound amazing. The Lord says, make a joyful noise.
Yeah.
And
I'm down with that. That's definitely my thoughts too.
and so one kind of strain or strand of song for me came through church. And I think for me also, growing up in a kind of many truths household, many conflictual truths. For me at church, it was in song that I felt the most connection to the divine.
Wow.
Collective song, not watching someone sing, not being the soloist, but just sort of coming together. That was always very powerful for me. And then I I grew up, I played the flute in school, and I ended up in high school actually being part in the US. There's a very strong tradition of marching bands.
Oh
And so a
yeah.
little known fact about me was I was not only in the marching band, I was the president of the marching band.
Oh, I think, is this a Priya Parker exclusive? I don't know if this is. I haven't read this anywhere else. Fantastic.
And then finally, when I was in college, I went to the University of Virginia, and I it's in the South in the States, and it's a campus that was and still is very defined by race, and I'm biracial, and I was very curious about all of these different communities that I both kind of that seemed to be so separate from each other in college. And I remember I always loved to sing, but I wasn't particularly good at it. And I tried out for a couple of a cappella groups, and didn't make it. And then a friend of mine said, "Hey, there's this incredible group that takes anybody, and it's called Black Voices. It's a gospel group. Come with me to one of the rehearsals." And so I said yes, and I went, and I ended up joining the Black Voices gospel group, and sang regularly in it for 2 years. And it was this incredible welcoming experience into, for me, a very different way of worshiping. I grew up very much in a white Christian context. I hadn't been exposed to a Black Christian context, and it was an incredibly freeing experience for me. And also as a multiracial person in the States, it was an incredibly powerful experience for me to, again, be in song with hundreds of other people and learning new ways of learning songs together, of moving one's body into very specific rhythms that, for me, some of the songs were very familiar because I grew up in the church, and some of them were completely different narratives to songs that I thought I knew, but were seen and sung in a very different way in that context. And so for me, I've always, clearly you asked me the right question, James, because I clearly have a lot to say about it. But to me,
Yeah.
collective song has always been an incredibly powerful experience in my life, and one that I think, for a lot of different reasons, some of them economic and some of them cultural, have dwindled down so much over the last few centuries that we no longer really do it except in some religious contexts. And song has become performative. And I think that's only having song be performative rather than experiential is a deep, deep loss. And I think when I look back at at so many of the formative experiences of my life, the ones where I always felt kind of fully alive and like having moments where it's like, this is something I want to be a part of, were kind of collective practices. So whether it's softball or basketball, which I played kind of throughout my childhood quite competitively, whether it was choreographing dances with my friends, in our basement, whether it was, memorizing Shostakovich, while as well as like 32 different line formations, marching through, the July heat in Southern Virginia. All of those moments, when I look back, at gatherings, when I look back at kind of what I think we can do so much better, they were deeply, deeply informative to me, that there are really powerful ways to come together to do collective work or joy.
And it's to do with synchronicity as well, isn't it? It's about synchronizing whatever you're doing with other people, and being part of that flow of the greater, the greater kind of way of things, I suppose.
But also with plenty of space for individual expression, right? So it's not just all melting into the blob. There's solos, there's duets, there's moments where the strings are raised up and the woodwinds are kind of decreased.
Come to the forefront.
There's so many different ways to still have individual expression, even within collective synchronicity. And I think that tension is something that I've always been interested in, and really try to tease out in my conflict work.
So we've mentioned gathering. So yeah, if you could maybe define what we mean, or rather what you mean when we're talking about gathering, and also why it's so important that we get it right.
So I define a gathering as any time 3 or more people come together for a purpose with a beginning, middle, and end. And so a gathering is really, it's an event. It's a moment in time. It's something that we are all doing all of the time, even during COVID. It may have moved into virtual or other forms. The Sofa Singers is one of my favorite examples of a COVID native gathering.
Thank you. Thank you.
But it's really an event, and it's not the same thing. A gathering is not the same thing as a community. Communities have gatherings, and gatherings can build a sense of community. But what I'm really trying to do as a group facilitator, which is my training and my background, is to look at this as something that can be improved. Something that,
right.
A wedding is a gathering, a funeral is a gathering, a town hall is a gathering, a choir practice is a gathering, a choir performance is a gathering, right? We're doing this all of the time. And I wrote this book now almost 3 years ago, The Art of Gathering, in part because I was going to gathering after gathering and realizing that what we've been told about what makes gatherings work, right? What to focus on, whether it's the food or the drinks or the flowers or the logistics, it's not that they don't matter, but they're not usually the source of connection. And we haven't been trained to actually create gatherings in simple ways that put connection at the center of the experience. And so I interviewed over 100 types of gatherers, from a choir conductor to the hockey coach of the Team Europe, to a photographer who has 7 minutes with a head of state and has to figure out how to get the right shot with 19 bodyguards in the room. And I asked them, how do you create transformative experiences for people? And what can the rest of us learn to make our everyday gatherings more meaningful?
Right. And the thing that you kind of start off very early with is not confusing the category with the purpose. And for me, that was a real game changer. And particularly relating that to my singing work. So could you maybe explain that concept?
Sure. I'd actually be curious to see how it applied to you.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe if you could maybe just explain it, and then I'll give you a couple of examples and flesh it out. Definitely. So
we tend to think that a category and a purpose in a gathering are the same thing. So what do I mean by that? Sticking along this line, a choir practice, right, is an activity. It's a category. A wedding, right, a funeral. It's not, and if anything, it's an activity. But you can have 1,000 different purposes within a wedding. You can have 1,000 different purposes within a practice. Is in a choir practice, is the underlying purpose for each time it may be different, to build trust? Is it to build the confidence of the sopranos? Right? Is it to create an environment where kids can feel safe trying different ways of being together? Right? There's 1,000 different reasons that we do activities. And the best gatherers tend to know... Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, and so and it's not about reverting to type and just thinking this is how we always do it, and assuming... Exactly. It's choir practice. Everybody knows it's Tuesday night. Everyone knows why we go to choir practice. That's exactly what we're getting at here. Right.
And that when you assume that it's a specific activity, we get really stuck in the form. Oh, a choir practice. Everybody lining up in rows, wearing red robes and holding a scripture. I mean, I'm making this up, but depending on where your choir practice is in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But when you don't have a specific assumption of what it has to look like, choir practice can look like 1,000 different things, right? I mean, I have young kids and recently had them watch The Sound of Music. Like choir practice was skipping through a field, right? Learning your scales, holding a picnic basket, experiencing freedom that your father never gave you within the walls of a house.
So what you're describing really, really resonates with me, because in my work as a singing leader, I come across preconceptions all the time about what choir is. You know, on the one hand, it might be wearing very formal clothes and singing, you know, like the Hallelujah chorus, okay, reading from sheet music. Or on the other hand, it might be something like Pitch Perfect, you know, where you're kind of doing backflips and singing in 10-part harmony and whatever. And which are both great. I mean, you know, I'll try everything. But they're not the only kind of expressions of communal singing. You know, there are so many manifestations out there, and there are so many more new manifestations that I think that if we think about it, and if we actually apply what you write about in The Art of Gathering, you know, that we can create a singing experience that feels right for everybody. And so, yeah, just maybe to give you an example, I think about 6 months after I read your book and was lucky to be at your workshop in New York in 2018, I set about working with my local pub. Really fantastic local pub, draws lots of different people in from the area, has like big open fires at Christmas and kind of winter time. It's very much like a hub for the community. Anyway, I thought, well, let's bring singing into this space. So I then started to think about, well, how might I bring singing into this space that isn't, okay, you know, this is going to be a kind of a formal choir, and where we, you know, like you say, we sit in rows and it's very formal. And I thought, I want to reach people who like coming to this place, like feeling the community, and actually might want to engage in singing, rather than doing it the other way around, rather than let's create a singing event and find people who might want to come, if that makes sense. So let's bring singing to these people who are already here. And yeah, and so then I started a monthly, I called it the Glyn Arms Pub Choir, just because there's a bit of a shortcut. And people were like, okay, so there's a choir in a pub? Like, how is this going to work? And basically, in fact, it was the format that pretty much laid the foundations for what I do at Sofa Singers, which is we learn a classic kind of song. So I was very explicit about what type of songs. So like 1 month it'd be like, this is David Bowie month, and we'll do 1 or 2 David Bowie songs. Then we might do, some Beatles songs or whatever. So it's kind of classic songs. I don't put anyone in any kind of part. So it's not like, what voice part are you? There's no solos. Like, here's this harmony if you want to sing this harmony. You know, bring your drinks in. And actually it was part of the pub experience. So we were kind of in a room, but then the bar encircled kind of the room. So we had other people who were kind of drinking, who would then just drift in and join it. And so it felt to me like it was kind of creating a singing outlet that I don't think the people who came to the pub choir would necessarily go out and join an existing formal choir.
Right.
But because I made it kind of quite clear that this actually isn't about singing, it's about being in this pub. It's about it being informal. It's about celebrating song and having fun. And, you know, like at Christmas, it was just like packed to the rafters, and people would bring their kids. And it was a really, really lovely thing. And it was a drop-in, so you didn't need to come every month. So it didn't have the trappings of a kind of a formal choir where you have to attend a number of performances, rehearsals, and then do a performance. Yeah, so I don't know if that kind of fits in with what you were describing there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's like and if, you know, we can geek out a little bit for a minute on this.
Please.
Like many of your choices were democratic, right? And it was this deeply empathetic sense, which I think is hard as somebody who is comfortable with song, or who sings, or who wrote a book literally about song, to have the empathy of the fear people frankly have been, and it's a relatively modern fear of singing kind of collectively and publicly. And so even like your design choice to not assign parts, tell me about that. I think it's brilliant.
Right. Okay. Well, this is something I've just been increasingly aware of, like in my work as a practitioner, because, you know, a traditional, in inverted commas, traditional kind of choir or chorus will divide voice parts up into, you know, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and then there's further divisions. According, you know, to the range of your voice, and then you're assigned a certain place, and then that then has its own kind of connotation. So, like, for example, if you're a bass, you won't often get the tune, okay? If you're a soprano, you're often cracking out the melodies and whatever. And so with that kind of comes, that feels to me that feels like baggage. So my thought was, okay, so someone's coming into this pub choir, right? Maybe they're a bit inhibited to sing. And this is an environment where they feel more comfortable. So they come in through the door, and immediately I say with a clipboard, are you soprano, alto, tenor, bass? And immediately they'll be like, okay, I'm out of my depth already. I'm not even sat down.
Exactly.
And I don't know what's going on. I don't know. Oh my goodness! Like, and then suddenly you've created instant tension where you don't need to. Because I guess kind of musically, what I'm aiming at for this is somewhere between like a pub sing along, you know, or just, you know, sitting down with a guitar around a campfire, you know, and something that's very, very organic. I wanted to have that feeling of kind of spontaneity and accessibility, but with kind of optional kind of peppering of, here's a bit of a harmony if you want to, and whatever.
Beautiful. And just to interrupt you, like that second layer, right? This is like such a beautiful design. That second layer is, you didn't just say, okay, let's just throw out harmony. These people can't do harmony. You enter it in subtly and in a what I would call a pro-choice way. Like it's pro-social. Yeah. People can choose and then identify without having to sign a clipboard and commit to what they want to do in a certain moment.
Yeah.
To say those, then it's this almost like invisible invitation for those who have the gift of harmony to just add to the harmony without actually from the beginning creating either two classes or the singers and the non-singers. And you center everybody by not having that clipboard and by just kind of teaching, you know, singing along, but allowing for a very subtle invitation for those who can and want to add the next layer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what it felt like. And it did become quite organic. And you hear that term a lot. Oh yeah, it was just really organic. And yeah, I mean, organic can be great, but at the same time, I kind of we have like a song here, we've got these different sections, and by the end of the night, we want that kind of feeling of euphoria when we sing the song together, maybe a couple of times.
Yeah.
So that I've got work I want to do here, but I'm not going to be so prescriptive that I'm going to let all that get in the way.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think
and the other thing with
I was just going to say, but you also made some radical choices. You chose a theme, right? David Bowie, the Beatles. Mm-hmm. Like you've made decisions like before anyone even enters, which also simplifies and isn't totally overwhelming to people to say, choose any song. You've chosen a couple of songs. It also, even if people aren't interested in singing, they may be interested in like knowing, oh, interesting. Why is David Bowie so famous? Or why are the Beatles particularly sing-alongable? Like you've made it easeful and you've made it interesting, and then people can decide if they want to dip their toe in.
And so is this part of, because I know a big part of your work is kind of I won't say specific, but
yes,
being specific, tongue-tied, so that people don't have to work these things out. Because, you know, we all have, you know, we only have so much bandwidth. And if you're having to try and figure out these invisible rules for yourself, then that can detract from the experience. So is what you're saying is because everything was quite specific. That it then kind of...
Absolutely. And what I would say in this case is the generosity of specificity. And part of the reason... It's not specific to be controlling. It's specific to allow people to engage. You know, when I did the research for The Art of Gathering, I looked at different forms of gathering from all types of cultures. And part of what I found was that in specific subcultures, so like Swedish families in northern Sweden, or Tamilian Brahmins in South India, or Javanese tooth filing ceremonies, that basically we have had many ways of gathering that are very powerful, particularly for communities who know the same lyrics, who pray to the same God, who eat the same diet, who are born and live and die in the same plot of earth. And so if you go to a end of summer Swedish celebration, you know the same. Everybody knows the lines to the Snapsvisa to sing, this drinking song that's often sung in a specific way. If you go to a Brahminical red thread tying ceremony, and the red thread is tied around a wrist at a specific moment in time, and everyone bursts into tears because they all know what that symbol means, and they all derive meaning from it. And what has happened as we've modernized and globalized is all, good things, but more human. I think maybe a decade ago, we crossed the line where more human beings around the world lived in cities than in rural areas, right? What does that mean? That means for many of us, we are forming new relationships. We're not living with the same people from our ancestry. That our gatherings, in trying to not offend one another, and also because it's complicated, they've become vague and diluted. And so what you did in that pub is that you invited for a specific moment in time, not forever, to ground the group in specificity so that they could have a common euphoric experience together without all having to be the same.
And with a pint of beer or glass of wine in your hand as well.
Absolutely.
Which for a lot of people, if we're talking about people being inhibited about singing, actually might have just slightly eased them in. So I guess like the context of that felt important as well. The fact it
absolutely.
wasn't a pub.
And that it's a beloved
familiar.
pub. Exactly. And that it was sort of like this mix of New York Magazine, a wonderful magazine here, has this thing like high-low, like highbrow, lowbrow, like, and the mixture of the two. And I think what you did is you were mixing contexts, right? A choir in a pub, right? It's funny, but it's allowing everyone to kind of like unbutton that top collar, that top button.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I looked at in my research was collective mechanisms that allowed people to be together outside of just having conversation. So like Snapsvisa in Sweden, which are like very specific singing songs that are a way that I'm told that if you grow up in specific places in Sweden, you know all the songs, you know all the lyrics. In the US, we have some of this sort of equivalently like the electric slide, which is a collective song that people may roll their eyes at. But at weddings is one of the few times everyone can get onto the dance floor. The majority of the people can get on the dance floor and they all know the same steps. Or like there's a country song, I'm forgetting the words of it. It's like, don't break my heart, my achy breaky heart. I just don't think you'll understand.
Oh,
but there's like steps to that song. The Cupid Shuffle, like there's a dance, there's a step to that song. We have in different sub-communities ways to basically have an entire group collectively participate in a structure. And that is a really deep source of joy and belonging. And I think the goal of modern life and the hardship is that we need some new structures because we're all now mixing together, which I think, and as a product of that mixing, is a good thing, but it takes work.
And it takes to kind of reimagine old ways of doing things, I guess, is what you're saying. It needs us to be creative about the way that we gather, but also then to create meaning, in the 21st century, I guess. A bit like, I don't know, I just made me think about Sea Shanties. Did you get that whole TikTok thing at the beginning of the year?
Yes, completely.
What was your take on that?
Oh my goodness. I was so moved by them. And to me, I think it's such a powerful example of collective song and of modern remixing. So like, if you listen to that, just like, first of all, like the ancient beat, right? It's like, he's literally just like, he's pounding the table. It's like a simple beat. as far as I understand, these were like worker songs. They were time passing songs. They were songs sung in part to keep a specific rhythm in like repetitive work, right? Whether you're wailing, but they were also, if you listen to the lyrics, like songs of longing, right? Like one day when the tugging is done, we'll take our rum and go. Or there were songs. So to me, it was like this beautiful example of a very haunting music that was about like wayfinding and passaging and being in this tunnel of COVID together, and then watching people around the world add their electric violin or exactly and the harmonies and then like the cats, the cat videos, always a cat video, like doing the techno remix version. Like it was this moment of like, to me, great joy and beauty, and also aching, like the melody and the actual notes. It was like it's this deep song of collective longing, but also of saying like, we are in this together for this moment and we will sing.
Yeah, and it was just how organic it was. I mean, I'm not on TikToks and I don't really properly understand it.
Yeah, me either.
But it really, really filled my heart with joy because it felt so organic, so spontaneous, and just it felt like a genuine expression. I mean, I see lots of Sea Shanties groups who kind of go out, who like dress in all the nauticalia and they sing songs on the concert stage. And for me, that's great because it's keeping the songs alive, but it's not really getting kind of to the core of what those songs are about. But actually, there was something that felt really genuine about the expression of the way that song, The Wellerman, kind of just gained this global momentum and people were adding their own voices. And it felt very, I don't know, it for me, it kind of felt more kind of meaningful in 2021 than it might be just, four blokes standing up and singing it in a concert. Does that make sense?
I think that it, like anything that goes viral, it hit a specific moment, that then there was a celebration also of all of the different, Zoom videos being added and spliced in and adding harmony over Zoom at this moment where we were all like on one too many Zooms, and then seeing the creative spirit, right, of a very simple rhythm. And again, if you want to geek out on the music a little bit, it's not an accident that it was like a worker song, right? Which means like there's a collective beat. It's a beat that's pretty simple to carry. The unifying beat. Yeah. The language is simple. Like I have young children. They know the words to like the entire, they know the words to the chorus, and they learn them pretty quickly. Like all of these things sort of came together, and I think TikTok in general during the pandemic in so many different ways have been repetitive explosions of joy and humor and just kind of like release. And to me, the Sea Shanties is one of the like most iconic examples of that and of so much of what you write and talk about.
And it also goes back to what we were saying at the start of the conversation about how over the last couple of 100 years we've kind of lost that sense of collective singing. And part of that is because if we look to songs like shanties and traditional music in general, if we look at it as kind of a broad category, globally, the musical material is such that people can join in for, without any kind of musical training, without having really heard it before. They're very singable. Musically they haven't got a big range. Quite often they might not have any harmonies or whatever. And so it lends itself. It's a bit like, the songs that we sing to our kids, a bit like nursery rhymes or whatever.
Yes.
They're very, very singable. And therefore they lend themselves to this group participation. And what we've lost over the last few hundred years is that collective sense of ownership over the songs. And it also, another thing I reflect on as we were talking about it, was that, we were also talking earlier about that need, that kind of tension between the individual and the collective. And it strikes me that sea shanties and traditional music, I guess more broadly, give you that perfect kind of framework, but also, people can sing solos in the verses, or they can kind of embellish it, or they can add their own parts. And so you're getting that kind of sweet spot between the two.
Yes. Yes, and in those layers of the videos, if you watch people adding on, I think his name is Nathan Evans, to his original video.
Yeah,
That's
the guy in
part of
Scotland.
the
Yeah,
yeah, that's part of the freedom of expression, right? They stuck to the same language, they stuck to the same lyrics, but then they started to harmonize and like the bass and the like unbelievable. And they had so
yeah,
many different ways of, but still there was a collective agreement to stick to the same lyrics, to stick to the same beat, to stick to the same song. So it's a wonderful example of that. I think also, this loss of collective song, some of it, there's a number of reasons for it. Some, like, our norms around singing have changed, and like who sings and who's worthy of singing, and what the purpose of singing is. It's moved from a
right.
form of kind of time pass and joy to entertainment, and entertainment, not like let's all be entertained together by all participating, but entertainment like there are people who can sing with a capital S, and then there's the rest of us.
Yeah.
And I would actually put myself in the rest of us category. Like, I make a joyful noise. And I was reading a book a couple of years ago called Deep Economy by Bill McKibben, and I remember this quote where some of the the bar to sing in front of other people has been raised higher and higher. So in the 1800s in the US, the state of Iowa, which is actually where my father's from, had 1,300 local opera houses. So in one state, literally 1,300 opera houses.
Wow.
All of them hosting concerts. Where, and this is the quote, I pulled this up for our chat, where thousands of tenors earned adequate, if modest, livings performing before live audiences, right? So 1,300 local opera houses, which means, first of all, it was much more normal and ubiquitous to be an opera singer, like, just very factually, right? There was literally more jobs. They had 1,300 houses to fill, right, multiple nights a week. And now Iowa, I think, has one opera house, two opera houses. So the consolidation of who gets that one spot, right? Just frankly, economically, exactly. And I think part of what's changed is what we sing for, and who we kind of deem worthy of song.
And I think so much of it, again, I think I might mention this earlier, comes down to permission. Like, people feel that they need some kind of permission to sing. And what I've kind of reflected on is that if we've talked a lot about kind of singing specific context, so, choirs and where we come in together specifically to sing. But if you zoom out from that, if I think about my childhood, singing was part of it, but I didn't really think of myself as a singer at all. I sung with my dad at the football matches at the top of my voice, because they were my team and I needed to sing for my team, and it was that collective release. I used to go to church in my village, and I would sing in church with my mum and with my friends, and for me that was like a function of me being in the community.
Yes.
Growing up in the village, and then when I got older, I joined, formed a band with my mates. I remember there were a 3-piece, guitar, bass, and drums, and they didn't have a singer. And I was like, well, I might as well sing. Like, you need a singer. Like, I might as well be your singer. And they were like, okay, yeah, great. And so I was there trying to sing Nirvana covers when I was 16. And again, that was just like an extension of me being mates with these 4 people,
Yeah.
And that's still the lens that I see singing through, is that essentially I think it can be, for anybody, it can be just an extension of the community that you're in, or a function of that community. And I think that's kind of the lens that I see that I see my work through. So for me, there's never been this kind of huge kind of chasm between a kind of professionalized singer and everybody else. I kind of just got on with it for about 20 years before I really realized the resonance of that. But if I compare that to my kind of instrumental kind of journey, when I studied trombone through university, that became, because that felt so pressurized and became very, there was a lot more pressure on that in terms of technique, then that suddenly became something else.
Yeah.
And something that wasn't perhaps as much from the heart and maybe competitive. But then I realized that's how people then feel about singing. So I feel like there's still so much work to do.
I mean,
but it's great to have other people like you batting for my team.
And I think that there's absolutely space for extraordinary talent. And I think there's absolutely space for,
Exactly.
thousands of hours of trombone practice. But it's not the only way. And I think part of what we've lost, and not everybody and not every community, but kind of collectively in modern life in terms of like the public square, is singing as a democratic act. And there's a wonderful choir here in New York called the Resistance Revival Chorus, and I believe their origin story was actually the Women's March in Washington D.C. And one of their and they sing, and they sung all through the Trump years. They sung at the polls during during voting to get people to stay in line and vote. They just would just sing at every context they could kind of get to. And one of their quotes is, I think it's a Harry Belafonte quote that's actually from the Civil Rights Movement that said, and I may not get exactly right, but I think it's, when the movement is strong, the music is strong.
Right.
And
that's brilliant.
And so singing is also like, as a facilitator, I grieve, and I hope that it's not a permanent grief. I grieve that I don't have, like, frankly, the tool of collective song in any context that I go into to help people open and close their gatherings. My day job is still as a group conflict resolution facilitator. Like, I wrote this book, and I'm a researcher, and I write and I speak, but my day job is still as a dialogue facilitator for groups. And so as a facilitator, like, I use, as any facilitator does, the many tools that one has to try to bring a group together. And the fact that song is not, in some contexts, it's completely still considered something people do. But in many, and at least in the States, singing has not in like non-religious contexts kind of transferred over. And it's a real trouble that I have, because there's so many ways that song and collective song, through singing, through experiencing, through listening, to being together in nonverbal ways, actually heals a group. And so I really, I think of you as very much as a translator and as a bridge that's using your voice to not just create permission, but to create real practice, whether it's the sofa singers or at the pub, to kind of remember that to sing is human, and bringing back the small s of song. Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that, because that is very much where I feel that I'm at with my practice. And actually, this is the last episode of Series 1 of the podcast, and kind of all conversations have pointed to what it means to be human. It's a podcast about singing, but actually, when we sifted through everything in the conversation, whoever it's been with, it's been about returning to our kind of humanity, and singing being a really important part of being human. And so, I feel like we're kind of on this quest together, Priya. Just give me a call, if you need someone to lead some singing, you've got my number now.
Sounds great.
I'm happy to parachute in.
And I think we're in this kind of very interesting transition space where, as we've lost trust in institutions like the church or Catholic Church, or or in the States, Boy Scouts, right? All these organizations are having these massive reckonings. We've lost trust in the government, where we've lost trust in just traditional institutions, and religious belief, or church or synagogue or mosque attendance is going down. All of these elements. Part of what has happened is the people who have been trained to do things like lead us in song or lead us in these collective mechanisms, we haven't yet found, we're in this kind of in-between period where like, you're not a rabbi, right? You're not an imam. You're not a religious leader, but actually the service that you're providing is like a democratic modern version of what people, leaders within these sub-communities used to be trained for, understand how to do, were trained for generations around, had a very specific craft and source of pedagogy. And we're it's almost like the old system has been breaking down for, decades, if not centuries. And I think of kind of the work of people who are bridging communities like yourself, kind of finding one sliver of what the meaning makers of old used to be responsible for. And as we're finding new ways to be as we modernize, are kind of distributed across pockets of people who are saying, like, let's still sing. It doesn't have to be in that same old way. You don't have to still believe that way or you're kicked out of the community. But let's bring the song through that reckoning and let's find like new ways to do it together.
Exactly. It's like, it's a collective kind of remembering almost, isn't it?
It's a remembering with space for also invention.
Love that. Remembering with space for invention. Well, look, you've mentioned the Soul Singers a couple of times. I can't let this opportunity pass without me saying a massive thank you for all of your support. Just before it started, I've actually just went through my Instagram messages that we exchanged at kind of 2 or 3 days before it happened, and you gave me so much encouragement and so many pointers, and you was like, just do it. You need to, you just need to make it happen, and blah blah blah. And I can't thank you enough for that support, because going back to what we discussed earlier about kind of confusing kind of category and purpose at the start of lockdown, when it was obvious we couldn't sing together, a lot of choir leaders were wringing their hands saying, oh, we can't all hear each other's voice and harmonize. And I thought, well, of course, because we're on Zoom, but actually, on reflection, we can still create a collective moment. We can see each other. We can synchronize movement on screen. We know we're synchronizing our voices. We can still create something that connects us, or at least we can give it a go.
Totally.
And that was what led me to do the first rehearsal on the 17th of March, and we haven't looked back. This is session number 115 this week, I think.
Wow.
The community is really, really strong. But yeah, so thank you for the nudge initially, but also for all the support as well. You've been such a support, and I really appreciate it, Priya. Thank you.
Well, you are so welcome. And I think, I saw it and I still see it as so powerful, because you're doing what all powerful gatherings do, which is you're responding to a real need, right? And you didn't get stuck of like what it had to look like. You responded to a real need, and you used your specific way of seeing and what you knew how to do to address that need. And people are responding. And I love seeing you take that practice and the discipline of, right, your 120th one or whatever it is, and then beginning to have a layer of pattern recognition to then host a podcast about what is this thing and why don't we do song and why don't we use this more, and not necessarily saying everybody join Sofa Singers, though they can, but you're also giving permission for people to remember kind of the moments in their life where perhaps as a child, perhaps as a teenager, there were quote unquote appropriate places to sing, whether it's like New Year's Eve and Old Lang Syne, or if you went to a college with specific songs, or if you're from a community, and some people have family songs, but we all have some memory of collective song, even if we don't use that language or think about it. And I think one of the things that you're really helping us all to remember is to bridge from that experience into whatever might be needed now, and to really, really take collective song seriously.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Kind of, it's like on the one hand, take it seriously because it is so important and it's so good for us. But on the other hand, don't take it so seriously that you put off from doing it.
Take it lightly. So, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So I feel that particularly Sofa Singers has been this very delicate balance, this very delicate dance between, I don't want it to be, kind of really wrought and over earnest and we're all at home singing these songs together. but I don't want it to be kind of goofy and jazz hands the whole time as well.
It's a very fine line you're walking. It's a very fine line.
Yeah. Treacherous, but no, I feel, I do feel that we've kind of found that balance, so we have those moments, where we can be fun and really playful, but then we do have moments where we zoom in and what, and we can kind of just appreciate the, how amazing it is to have 400 people on a Zoom call, all sharing their energy, so yeah, it's like many things, isn't it? As we've discussed, it is a fine balance. Now, you were saying that everyone has these kind of moments in their life, where they were part of a singing experience. I heard you on a Brené Brown's podcast recently talking, or you mentioned it, you didn't really go into it, about when you were at a Simon Garfunkel gig. and there was some spontaneous singing in the crowd as a response to Art Garfunkel losing his voice. Could you just tell me a little bit about this? I was so intrigued. I was like, I want to know more.
Sure. Well, it's funny. She has such a far reach with her podcast. Afterwards, I got DMs from people who were at that very same concert.
Really?
Saying,
wow.
I remember that moment. So it was years ago at Jazz Fest in New Orleans. And I was there with my then boyfriend, now husband, and actually my parents and my mother and stepfather. And it was this massive open field with, I don't know, 8 or 9 stages. And my mother and I particularly always just loved Simon and Garfunkel. And we knew we were, it was a huge field. So it was kind of hard to navigate, but we knew we wanted to go to that concert. And, and showed up and they sang, and, it was awesome to kind of hear them and see them together, which I think was so rare. And then you can't make this up, during Bridge Over Troubled Waters.
Not that song, really.
Yeah. Art Garfunkel kind of lost his voice.
Wow.
And he tried a few times, and then we could hear it was just shot, like he was done. And it was a small moment, and then the entire thousands of people just began to sing his words. And it was just incredible. It was just this, it was an audience, it was a group, it was a gathering that kind of carried him through, and then through that carried us through. And it became this moment, in part because he was vulnerable, whether he wanted to be or not, that allowed us all to step in and be part of it.
Wow. I'm getting goosebumps just hearing about that. Sounds just incredible. Singing is so powerful, isn't it? Goodness me. So you had Art Garfunkel's back that day. Fantastic. Okay, well, look, I've really enjoyed the Geeking Out, Priya. Don't ever apologize for geeking out when we're having a conversation about singing and music. I've really enjoyed it. We have a podcast playlist where I invite every guest to choose a song or some kind of vocal performance that's important to them. I wonder what we could add for you.
Well, I will just say before we close that I think, again, part of the reason we can geek out is because you've chosen something really specific. And so when you choose something specific, there's actually an entire world behind it. And that I can talk with you about Collective Song for an hour and probably many more hours, because there's actually so many layers, and you weren't afraid to just choose this thing and then realize that there's enormous worlds behind it. A song for your podcast, I would say, I actually said this song with Brené as well, and to me it's such a powerful gathering song. It's called "Come Along" by Cosmo Sheldrake, and it's this beautiful song that has a very strange and unusual opening. It almost sounds like a massive orchestra at the very beginning, and then it almost feels like a Pied Piper kind of jumping through, this is my imagination of it, jumping through a magical forest, kind of pulling everyone along to come along, and sing and dance and be together all night long until the songbird comes in the morning. Wow. It's a song he actually, I first heard him play live years ago at a at a kind of gathering that my mother took me to, and the song just blew me away. And then years later, I heard it at a pub sitting with my husband at a bar, and I said, "What is this? You have to Shazam this. You have to Shazam this. What is this song?" And he showed it to me, and I almost fell out of my chair because I realized it was this song that I heard years ago at someone's backyard that captured me then and still captures me now. And I think it's just an incredible piece of music.
So the final question is, if we can take a life lesson from singing, what would it be?
That it is good, and that it is good to do together.
Amen to that. Yeah, absolutely. Priya Parker, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Good luck with all of this, and thank you for what you do.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. I think that's the perfect way to end this episode, and the perfect way to end this first series of the podcast. Singing is good, and it's good when we do it together. 100% agree. Thank you very much, Priya Parker, for that, and for today's conversation, which is one I know that I'll revisit time and time again and keep finding new pearls of wisdom. There was so much in there and so much to take from it. So Priya, thank you so much. If you want to find out more about Priya, about her work, about her podcast, about her book, then do go to priyaparker.com, and I encourage you to sign up for her newsletter. You'll find the link in the show notes, and it's a monthly newsletter full of insight and inspiration all around the art of gathering. So do sign up. It's really something to look forward to arriving in your inbox each month. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the podcast playlist and Priya's fantastic choice by Cosmo Sheldrake. Not a song that I knew before, but it's absolutely gorgeous. So do listen to that, and you'll find the choices by all of the guests from this series. So I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the guests who've given me their time and their insights for this first series. It's been a real joy, and likewise it's been a joy getting the feedback from people who've been listening and engaging through the messages I've received and emails. They are really, really appreciated, and I've included in the show notes my social media handles so you can get in touch. Please keep sharing the word about singing, that it is good for us and it is for everybody. So to help get the word out about singing in the podcast, you can share, you can review on Apple Podcasts. And do follow me on social media to find out about Series 2, which will be coming later on this year in 2021. Thanks very much for listening, and keep singing. Bye for now.